Alright, guys, as I continue to get caught up on old news here, I just thought I'd weigh in on the absolute fucking train wreck that is The Last of Us Part 2. Now, I was a fan of the first game, which I do believe some people went overboard with it, talking about how, oh, it's such a masterpiece and one of the greatest games in gaming history. It wasn't that good. I thought it was solid. I very much enjoyed it, but it was definitely oversold by some people. But I was in the camp that was hoping that there wouldn't be a sequel to that game at all because the first game was self-contained. It was really good, and sometimes when you have something good, you need to just leave it alone. And I thought this was one of those times. But then it ended up selling so well and having such a positive reception that you knew it was inevitable it was going to get a sequel at some point. So I was hoping that if they are going to do a sequel, then they would just have a game set in the same world, but have it be totally new characters, totally new story, not narratively related to the first game in any way, other than maybe like some subtle references or a little crossover here and there, sort of a crossing paths kind of thing. But then when the first trailer for this game was initially revealed, and we found out that that was not the case, and it actually was a direct follow up to the first one, my hype was sort of set to a permanent low level after that because I automatically assumed that, like, even if this one turned out good, it's probably not going to be as good as the first one. So I never had a moment where I was particularly overly excited for this game or like largely looking forward to it. And then over time, of course, it kept getting delayed. And then the leaks happened. And I read the leaks and watched what videos I could find of the leaks. And that pretty much confirmed that this thing was going to be a complete disaster. Which is how it turned out. So fortunately, I did not buy it. I waited and watched an entire playthrough on YouTube, which was a horrible decision. Not buying it was a good decision, but tormenting myself by watching the entire thing was a bad decision. So I watched all of this, and I definitely dodged a bullet here. This thing was a complete mess. The story, anyway. Which, in a narrative driven game such as this, the story is disproportionately important. The story and the characters. And that's the element of this game that wound up being the biggest disappointment. All the things that were in the first game that made that story so good. The balance between the like shitty destroyed world and the positive sort of innocent relationship between Joel and Ellie. The contrast of that and sort of balancing the very brutal graphic violence with the lighter moments with Ellie like finding the porn magazine in the back of the truck and the scene with the giraffe and everything. It created a juxtaposition between these two things in the first game that really carried the narrative, which you didn't really have anything like that in this game. They tried to recreate it, but it ended up just falling flat because you had moments with we are going to get into spoilers here if anyone cares at this point. Probably not, since this video is weeks later than it should have been. But you had moments where, like, Abby and her dad saved the zebra that was caught in the fence or whatever. And you had the flashback scenes with Ellie and Joel going through the museum and stuff, which those were good. But it came off as just them trying to recapture that magic, and they just couldn't do it. They also tried to recreate Joel and Ellie's relationship between Abby and Lev, which definitely didn't work because both Abby and Lev were very much unlikable characters. In fact, pretty much all of the characters they introduced in this game were not very likable. And the returning characters, most of them had their characters ruined. So the entire thing was just a disaster. You had Joel, who got murdered right off the bat in a very out of character, unceremonious way. And then, of course, we didn't see him the rest of the game because he's dead, except for the flashbacks. You had Tommy, who went off with Ellie in pursuit of revenge on Abby, and he ends up getting all fucked up. He loses his eye. He's got a limp. His wife leaves him. Like his whole life gets ruined, and his brother's dead. Then you got Ellie, who's still the main character, who absolutely loses everything. Joel gets killed. Her bisexual wife, girlfriend, I don't know. Does marriage even still exist in this world? I don't know. I'm going to say wife. Her bisexual wife and her bastard child leaves her because she couldn't quit pursuing revenge against Abby, and then when she finally gets the chance to have revenge against Abby, she ends up cucking out at the last second and not actually killing her. In fact, she saved her because Abby was tied to the fucking post thing and would have died anyway if Ellie just did nothing. So, the entire thing is retarded. Ellie ends up saving the person she sets out to kill. Abby ends up killing Joel right after he saved her early on in the game. The entire thing was stupid. All these characters sucked. All of Abby's group were just really awful people. They tried to build it up like we see everything from their perspective, see it from Abby's point of view, and supposed to feel bad that, Ellie rolled through and fucking just steamrolled all of them and murdered them all. But you didn't really feel that way because everyone in Abby's group was an asshole. You had Abby herself, who was automatically working from behind because right off the bat she kills a beloved character from the first game. And she goes on to prove herself to just be a giant annoying bitch the rest of the game, to the point where even the other members of her group are openly talking about how awful she is. You had Manny, who was just an annoying cunt the entire time, and I laughed my ass off when Tommy shot him in the fucking face. So he died, and it was one of the more positive moments in the game. Then you had Owen, who was Abby's love interest, and he was a complete asshole because he had a pregnant wife too. He was going to abandon his pregnant wife to chase after a rumor of the Fireflies restarting, and then he ends up cheating on her anyway when he goes in dry on Abby's ass, which was a very disturbing scene that I could have done without seeing that. Definitely. But then he ends up getting killed anyway. So, fuck him. And then his wife, Mel, she wasn't even likable either because she was like one of the doctors, one of the medical people for the Wolves. And she's pregnant. And she's voluntarily going out on missions with Abby, putting herself and her baby in danger, not caring if Owen has anything to say about that. Maybe he doesn't want his baby put in danger. Of course, he's going to abandon the baby anyway, so I guess it doesn't fucking matter. But she's an asshole by putting her own needs ahead of her unborn babies and going out and putting them both at risk, when she could have stayed back at the Wolves base, and she still could have contributed. It's not like she would have been sitting around doing nothing. She is a doctor. They had plenty of injured people laying around. She could have helped a ton there. It's not like they absolutely needed her out in the field. So she ended up being unlikable. So I didn't really give a shit when Ellie killed any of these people. They're supposed to be weight to all these deaths, and there just wasn't. They tried to make it have weight when you killed the NPCs by giving them all individual names, and it just doesn't work. As gamers, we've been conditioned for our entire lives, or however long we've been gaming, to not give a fuck about the random NPCs we kill. It's too much to try to go against that years of habit to make people care about that. It's not going to work. The entire premise of this game is based on the fact that Abby's dad was one of the random NPCs we killed in the first game and didn't give a fuck about. it it's just not going to go the way you want it to go. I'm sorry. So this entire story was trash. All the characters were trash. Well, mostly. I didn't really care for Dinah. She wasn't an asshole like everyone else is, but I just kind of found her annoying. Really, the only new character they introduced that was all right was Jesse. He was okay, and he got shot in the fucking face. So there you go. And then also, I guess I better get into this. They also had the Seraphites. They introduced that entire cult. They're crazy cult people. You had Lev and Yara, who were the two kids. They ran away from the cult people because Lev wanted to pretend that she has a penis. And I guess we're supposed to feel sorry for them because of the crazy cult people, but then it sort of falls flat because Lev ends up going back to the cult people to try to save their mom. And Abby and Yara chase after Lev to try to save her. And then once you finally get there, Lev ends up killing her own mom. And then Yara gets killed in the process. So Lev causes the death of her mother and her sister. And then we're supposed to feel sorry about it for some reason. Like, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Everyone in these games makes stupid, awful decisions. And you end up not liking any of these people. So the entire thing fell flat. The best part of the game wasn't even intentional because it was Fat Geralt, which is the fan name for him because the character in the game was never actually given a proper name. He was a member of the Rattlers and he looks like Geralt from the Witcher series, except he's a fat ass. The best scene in the whole game was when he just like runs up out of nowhere and just fucking punches Lev in the soul and knocks his face into the garage door. That was hilarious. That was the best scene in the entire game. And it wasn't meant to be funny at all. I died laughing watching that, but it wasn't meant to be funny. It was meant to be serious. So this entire thing definitely didn't go the way that Naughty Dog and Neil Druckmann was hoping that this was going to come across. It came across largely as poorly written, like Tumblr fan fiction that was at moments borderline sexual, which, you know, I'm not saying that Neil Druckmann has some sort of weird fetishes or anything. I'm just saying that if someone did have some weird fetishes, there was parts of these games that they would probably enjoy. I'm just going to leave it at that. But with the story and the characters being disproportionately the important part of this game and them being fucked up so badly, it ended up really hurting the overall experience to a large degree. Which I would argue it actually sort of messed up the ending to the first game as well, because part of what made the ending to the first game so good was the ambiguity of it all, and whether or not Joel's decision was actually the right thing to do. And this game sort of took away some of that ambiguity, which was inevitable with something like this when you're making a direct sequel to a game that ends on that sort of a note. No matter what you do, it's inevitably going to happen. But at least for me, it had more of an effect because with my interpretation of the ending of the first game, the moment at the end where Ellie says okay to Joel, that look in her eyes, I interpreted that as meaning that Ellie understood that Joel was lying to her, but she realized sort of what was going on. She sort of knew deep down that she was going to die in the process, and that she knew Joel was lying to her, but she sort of accepted it because she realized how much her life really meant to Joel, how much she really meant to him. So she was just going to kind of go along with it because her life mattered. Like, she wanted her life to matter, and she realized that her life did matter to Joel. So she found what she was looking for, not in the form of being a cure, but in the form of saving Joel in a way. And that whole thing sort of completely got ruined in this game by the fact that they focused very heavily on the fact that Ellie did not realize what was going on, and then she found out later and was pissed off at Joel about it. And it sort of takes away from the whole argument that, you know, people debated endlessly about whether the cure was an actual possibility or if the Fireflies were just kind of up their own ass about it and weren't actually capable of creating a cure, and if they had killed Ellie in the hopes of it, that they still wouldn't have been able to and would have been killing Ellie for nothing, basically. They ended up sort of just wiping that entire possibility off the map because they heavily implied that the cure would have worked and would have happened if Ellie had gotten killed or sacrificed herself, whatever. So they ended up taking away a lot of the ambiguity from the first game's ending, which is a large part of what made that ending so powerful. So this game's narrative was not only damaging to itself, it was also damaging to the first game as well, I believe, a little bit. The gameplay, I thought, was an improvement over the first one, but not a drastic one. It seemed like just slightly more refined version of the first game. I was really disappointed in the Shamblers. They showed them as the new infected type prior to release, and I thought that they were going to be much more of a threat than they were, since they were supposed to be like a more evolved form of the bloater or whatever. But they were actually way weaker than the bloater was and a lot easier to kill. Their only issue was they like exploded with spores when you killed them. So as long as you killed them from a distance, they were actually weaker than the clickers were. So that was kind of disappointing. The Rat King boss fight, that was cool. I'll give them credit for that. They did a good job on that. The Rat King thing was cool. Other than that, the gameplay wasn't really a huge step up from the first game. And then, of course, you had the clear social agenda. I've seen people trying to say that there wasn't an agenda in this game. Come on, dude. You gotta be totally kidding me. Like, it's one thing to maybe agree with the agenda, but to try to pretend that it's not there is just being dishonest. You got Ellie bitching about bigot sandwiches right off the bat. It's it's just laughably blatant. I think we hit every letter of the alphabet, people, too. I'm pretty sure. Well, you never know. They keep adding more letters to it, and they got like symbols and shit in it now, I think. But this entire game was just a mess. I'm very much glad I didn't buy it. And then, of course, there's many more issues beyond the actual game itself. Naughty Dog being very overbearing with their DMCA claims. I actually got a tweet. I don't tweet anymore, but this was a while ago. I had a tweet from weeks after I actually posted it get taken down because I tweeted out the Joel in One Pro Golf meme, like box art. And like way later, that ended up getting taken down for a DMCA claim. That was just a meme. That wasn't even like any actual footage of the leaks or anything. When she could have went through a whole process to try to get it put back, but I don't even bother tweeting anymore, so I didn't give a fuck enough to deal with that. But you had Naughty Dog being very anti-consumer in their response to the leaks and their response to the negative backlash to these games. You've had their reputation probably permanently tarnished here, which is really sad because up until now, Naughty Dog has been one of my favorite Western developers because I haven't played every Naughty Dog game they've ever put out, but every one I have played has always been a positive experience. So it's really disappointing now to see a studio like that putting out really their first giant turd. And that's definitely what happened here. And then, of course, there's the entire other issue of allegations of, mistreating employees and problems actually in studio, people working there and not getting along and being mistreated and crunch time and all that, which I'm not going to get into all that because I still haven't seen any actual hard evidence for that. I've seen a lot of claims and stuff being made, and you know how that goes. So I'm not getting into all that. But this entire thing was definitely a train wreck, and it was definitely really disappointing just to see how badly this turned out. Who knows if we'll ever get a part 3. I don't know if the backlash will be enough to discourage them from releasing a part 3. I guess it will depend on how the sales end up doing, which I don't have sales figures or anything in front of me. With the amount of people shilling for it and trying to justify it, and just the people who will buy the game even if they don't care about it just because it pisses off people that they perceive to be their enemies, then I imagine the sales are probably still going to end up being pretty solid, regardless of the quality of the game. If we do get a third, the sales might drop on that because people were disappointed after they bought the second one. But it's one of those things where we just had to wait and see. I've noticed the reaction to this game has had a lot of parallels with the reaction to Sword and Shield, with a certain segment of the audience defending it no matter what to their dying breath, and another large portion of the audience being very vocal with their displeasure of it. So it's very interesting to see how these things go. But anyway, I guess that's all I got to say. So lots of luck to you and yours.